Welcome to another episode in writing ELT materials. Today I want to look at self-publishing. Lots of people have self-published books and materials and ELT materials, but how many of them have done it profitably? Well, my guest today is Luis Otávio Barros from Brazil. Apologies for the pronunciation to any of my Brazilian friends out there. Now, I talked to Luis about his background initially, and then we start to talk about the process of self-publishing and the mistakes he made and the successful things he did, who he brought in on the project. About midway through, we start to look at Luis's figures, and that's where it really gets interesting. His sales figures, I think, are incredible for a self-published book. And then we look at his other future plans for publishing, and he gives some really key tips for anybody interested in self-publishing at the end. I hope you find this episode of interest. If you do, please subscribe at the end.
I've been in ELT since 1990. So we're talking nearly 30 years. And I've done a lot of teaching, teacher training, and I've written books for Pearson, for Richmond, and then for Amazon, of course.
We better just establish where you are from originally.
From Brazil.
Okay.
Born and raised, and then I did a master's at Lancaster University in 1998, 1999.
Okay. And so the books that you've written with Pearson and so on, have they been global? Have they been specific to Brazil?
The Pearson books were Brazilian titles, for a secondary school. The Richmond books were international titles.
And just very briefly, was getting into materials writing something you consciously tried to do, or it sort of happened by accident?
No, it's something I'd always wanted to do since the 90s. Because part of my work at Cultura Inglesa, São Paulo, that's a big binational center, was developing in-house materials. And then part of my work at Associação Alumni, another binational center in São Paulo, was to develop in-house materials too. I've always liked writing stuff, but it was only it was only in 2003, 2004 that I got my first official writing gig for Pearson, and then a few years later for Richmond. And that's when I started to define myself professionally as a full-time author.
Okay, great. Now I have to admit something here. I've always been slightly skeptical when ELT writers have said I'm self-publishing a book, because I've always thought to myself, is there really any money to be made in it? And I kind of like working with teams. I like working for publishers. I like to know there's people who deal with marketing, and I like to work with an editor. So part of the reason I wanted to speak to you, I mean, we've met before, but was when I first noticed you mentioned, I think online, the kind of sales figures you were getting with your first book, The Only Academic Phrase Book You'll Ever Need. And the figures, which we'll come on to later, were really impressive. But let's start with the process. What was the process that made you arrive, first of all, at going self-publishing? And are there sort of key steps, if somebody wanted to do it, what are the steps you need to go through to produce something like this?
Right. When I came up with the idea for the academic phrase book, I was halfway through the Richmond book, Identities. And, it's a long story. It all started in 1998 at Lancaster University when I was doing my master's. I had lots of essays to write and then the dissertation at the end. And I knew what I wanted to say, but I lacked the kind of language that would allow me to express myself in such a way that...
you were lacking sort of academic phrases.
Exactly, yeah? Exactly. I wanted to belong to that kind of discourse community. And then it hit me that I kind of had to write like them. So I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Whenever I read an article or a book, I'm going to try to notice. Before, I think even before noticing became a buzzword, I tried to notice new phrases and sentences, especially sentences that I could borrow whenever I wrote my own stuff. I'm not talking about plagiarism, of course. I'm talking about sentence frames that would enable me to sound a little bit more like them, the discourse community I wanted to belong to. And then I made a list, and then I did my essays and my dissertation, and I passed, and I got a distinction. So it kind of worked. And then I put that list away, and I didn't throw it away though. I put it away for a few years, and then cut to 2014. I was I was trying to free up some space on my hard drive, and I stumbled upon the original list. And then I looked at it, and I said, maybe I could turn this into a blog post. And the original list was much longer than that, but I chose 70 useful sentences, and I sort of organized them around keywords. And I didn't think anybody was going to read that post or want to share that post, but it kind of went viral. It kind of went as viral as I could get at the time. So I said to myself, maybe I'm onto something, you know?
So this is like the market research stage, isn't it? Finding out you've suddenly discovered there's a market out there for it. Okay.
Yeah, I think there was a niche out there that I was able to tap into. And that's when I realized, you know, that maybe I was onto something. And then a year later, it hit me that maybe that blog post could turn into a book.
So what were your next steps in terms of getting it to print?
Right. I'd read about self-publishing, but part of me wanted to dip my toes in that universe. You know, I wanted to give it a try. Part of me wanted the safety of a big publisher. But here's what I thought. No publisher in their right mind would take a chance on a phrase book, you know, written for university students, a very short phrase book, not a very ambitious concept.
Well, no, so, I have to say what I like about it is just, if anybody wants to see what it looks like, it's got these, it's all black and white font. It's straightforward. I guess it's what, Times New Roman or something?
Yeah.
It's a bit of bold, some headings, and I just love the simplicity and sort of straightforwardness of it. There's no pictures or anything. It's just, it is what it is.
Yeah. And it took me, anyway, so I decided that I wanted to self-publish this one. I'd read about it. I watched a few videos about self-publishing.
Okay.
It wasn't a particularly steep learning curve.
What platform were you using?
I knew that Amazon was where the big money was. So I initially focused on Amazon. And the actual process was very simple. You create a Word document, and then Amazon converts it into EPUB or MOBI or whatever they call it. And then to publish the print version, the paperback, you turn the Word document into a PDF. So really, it took me about a day.
Wow.
And, you know, at the time, the stakes were not particularly high because I thought the book would sell 100 copies and then fade into oblivion.
And did you get an editor of any kind?
Yes. I hired a Brazilian friend of mine who lives in the States, and she became a big-time academic in the States. So I asked her if she would do it, and she said, yeah, let's do it. And she gave me lots of useful feedback. You can't really self-publish without an editor.
I know I've heard people just self-publishing, one of my first questions is always, did you have an editor? And I'm
I
really
did.
surprised when they say
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, no, well, luckily she said yes.
Yeah.
She didn't want to charge anything though.
That's it was a nice friend to have, just offering
Yeah.
a drink.
And then for the second book, for 100 phrasal verbs, I hired the same person who edited the Richmond books.
Right.
Exactly. 100 phrasal verbs to learn for life. Her name is Deborah Goldblatt, and she's wonderful. So I asked her if she was available, and she said yes. And then she gave me an estimate, and I said, okay, let's do it. And she helped me put the book together and gave me lots of feedback on, the kind of feedback that an editor gives you.
What about, so that was the editing, but what about the actual layout and the format of, well, both books?
I did it myself because I ran out of money. Right. And I could, because I had to pay for the cover.
This one is, the layout is relatively simple. This one is much more, I mean, suddenly you've got photos and all sorts of design features, and there's all sorts of costs attached to that.
I did it myself. That was a very steep learning curve. But I think I was able to pull it off. It looks pretty decent.
Let's come back to that second one a bit later. But this one, the first one, was your experiment. Who designed the cover? How did you sort out?
A Brazilian ELT colleague, and he's the same guy who designed the other one. He's very talented. And it's funny because that was not the original cover. This is what it used to look like. And then that was when he told me, I think you can have a better cover. I think you should have a better cover. And this one was so weird that people thought the guy on the cover was me. And I said, no, that's a stock image. Anyway, and then he designed the second cover. And that's when, maybe it's a coincidence, but that's when the book kind of took off. So sales-wise. So a nice cover does matter.
So you got an editor in, you got a designer in, you had yourself. Anybody else involved in all of that?
Oh, yeah. 3 friends of mine who offered to proofread the book.
Okay. So
because proofreading is really important.
Yeah.
Really important.
And presumably they were also teachers who could give you a bit of feedback on it as well, yeah? Were they?
Not necessarily, because by then the book had already been edited.
Okay.
And the concept was kind of in place, and it was ready to go. So any kind of feedback at that time, I would have dismissed out of hand because I couldn't implement it.
Right. So you had proofreaders as well. One other question I was going to ask, did you pilot any of the material?
No.
Okay.
No. Because both of them are mostly meant for self-study. They're reference books. So
but I just wondered whether at some point you put them in front of students, said, try these, do you like it?
No, I wish I'd been able to, but I couldn't.
Okay. That's interesting.
So,
all right.
Yeah, the proof of the pudding was actually in the eating.
Okay. So let's just think, so you had all of those people involved and the whole process, okay, it's slightly weird because you sort of started collating the content years before while you were doing your master's. But the actual, from the moment you decide to make it happen to it being available on Amazon, what kind of length of time are we talking about?
For you mean the academic phrase book or both? The academic phrase book?
Yeah.
A year.
Okay.
A year. Because, it's one thing to have a viral blog post. It's quite another to create a viable product, So I had to expand on the original list. I had to find a new way of grouping those sentences, of organizing those sentences other than keywords. And I had to read beyond the field of second language acquisition and education. So I spent 6 months reading about engineering and medicine and physics, you know, just to test the waters and just to make sure that the kind of language that I was exposing students to was not specific to education.
Right.
That the kind of language the kind of sentences that I chose were as universal as realistically possible. So I had to read lots of boring stuff.
So the context for the sentences are all sorts of different academic contexts, basically, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Okay. From education to chemistry.
Right. Before we get on to the sales and the costs, what were the key takeaways from this first experience that you took from this, so that when you came to the next book, you thought, okay, that's what I learned from the first book. This is what I need to do for the second.
Okay. Number one, you need to have a nice cover. We've talked about it. Number two, proofreading is really important, because when the academic phrase book came out, there were like 2 or 3 typos. And guess what? As fate would have it, somebody found those typos and they wrote not very nice reviews on Amazon saying, yeah, I found a typo in the book, and they gave me 2 stars or 3 stars, and not 1 star though, but 2 or 3 stars. And those reviews are there forever. You can't erase them. And I should have asked more people to proofread the book, which I did in the second one. And Amazon takes reviews very seriously. They can make or break a new title. So that's one thing.
Right.
2, initial first month sales are really important, because you need to make sure that Amazon's algorithms take you seriously. You need to make sure that because there are millions of books on Amazon, so you've got to find a way to stand out. So, you know, their algorithms need to know that you're for real. So first week sales are important. Second week sales are important. So
what are we looking at here?
We're looking at sales from late February to late May. So we're talking about 3 months of sales.
This is for which book?
This is 90% the only academic phrase book you'll ever need, and 10% 100 phrasal verbs.
Okay, so this is like your total turnover as a self-publisher.
That's my total turnover, exactly. And they say 3 books here because I wrote a book in Portuguese, a 20-page book in Portuguese, just to test the platform. So that doesn't count. It only sold, 10 copies. So we're basically talking about 10 books. And mostly the only academic phrase book. 90% of these figures come from the academic phrase book. So we're talking 1,000 copies a month, 900, 1,000 copies a month.
And is that pretty consistent since it came out?
Yeah, no. It took me about 2 years to reach, those figures.
But after the 2 years and you reach maybe 1,000 copies a month, is it more or less stayed consistent?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And then they did increase a little after I tried Amazon advertising, which is not particularly expensive. It seems much more effective than Google advertising. And it did increase sales by about 10-15%.
So just explain, with the Amazon advertising, you're paying Amazon a bit of money, and where does your book then pop up? How does it affect how Amazon sells it?
As either a suggested product or as a bundle up. Readers who bought X also bought this one. So you're more likely to sell more.
When you say it's not that expensive, how much is it roughly?
We're talking about $200 a month.
Okay.
And it's worth it.
But of course, you're selling 1,000 copies a month, and what do you sell your book for? Your academic phrase book?
God, I don't know by heart. I think it's about seven.
People, I mean,
About
people can look it up on Amazon if they
sure.
really want to know.
I think it's about $8 for the paperback and $4 for the ebook. And then 100 phrasal verbs is a little pricier because it's longer.
And what percentage of all of that do you take, and what does Amazon keep?
Mm-hmm. They're very generous royalty-wise. For ebooks, depending on the market, anything from 35% to 70%. So in the US, in the UK, in Germany, and France, I get 70% for the ebook, and Brazil, Japan, India, 35%, which is still okay. And then for the paperback, 60% minus printing costs. Still, it's a pretty good deal.
So do you have an idea then on your total cost for both books and a rough idea of what you've made from it so far?
Right. The academic phrase book has sold about 27,000 copies to date.
Wow.
It's not bad at all. And never in my wildest dreams could I imagine that a little phrase book would go on to sell that many copies. And I don't know what the future has in store for 100 phrasal verbs because it's a different kind of book. I don't know how well it will do, honestly. It's not selling as well as the academic phrase book in the opening weeks or in the first 3 or 4 months. I don't know whether it's because, one, 100 phrasal verbs is meant for non-native speakers. It's meant for EFL and ESL students, whereas the academic phrase book is sold mostly to native speakers of English.
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I didn't see it coming, honestly. When I look at the reviews and when I look at some of the emails I get from customers, most of them are American university students and British university students too. So that might explain why it's selling so well. I don't know.
But I think it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because that first book was very much you were solving a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's possibly a good starting point for somebody. You think there isn't something out there that solves this problem. I've got this problem, sort of. And then your situation is the same for thousands of other people.
Exactly. And you know, I have very few competitors on the market, maybe 2 or 3, and they're not exactly the same. Whereas if you look at 100 phrasal verbs, there are dozens of really, really good phrasal verbs. So honestly, I don't know what the future has in store for me, but I remain optimistic.
And you use it, unlike the other book, you use a lot of photographs and stuff. So where did you take your images from? Did you have to pay for those?
Oh yeah. From Shutterstock. They're all, you know, pretty standard, boring images. They're very expensive, but you gotta pay for them, of course.
Yeah.
So that means that 100 phrasal verbs cost me about $3,000 initially, because I had to pay for the cover, I had to pay for the stock images, I had to pay for the editing, and that was totally worth it. I'm not complaining. But good editors, you know, they cost a lot of money. Yeah. I'm not complaining, but so editing, stock images, the cover, and the website, and the landing page. Something I didn't do when I wrote the only academic phrase book, which I did for 100 phrasal verbs, was to have somebody create a landing page. This is the landing page, and you need to get somebody to write a nice review for your book. I've heard that Amazon's algorithms really like it when somebody gets to their site coming from another site. So apparently, sales-wise, it's much better to send your customers to Amazon using a landing page rather than posting the actual Amazon link on social media or whatever it is. I think maybe the key to being successful in self-publishing is to look at the process in a slightly different way, is to look at yourself not only as an author, but as a mini publishing company, a publishing house, is to be willing to spend the time and the money to hire people to help you, like a big publisher will do, you know? And maybe that's how you become a successful indie author.
So a final question, what's next in terms of your self-publishing plans?
There's another reference book in the works. I haven't started yet. I need to tighten the concept. I need to imagine what a typical lesson is going to look like. And I'd like to write another course book. It's been a while. It's been 4 years since I wrote a mainstream course book. And you can't self-publish a course book, you know, because of the very nature of a mainstream course book. So I'm open to a good offer, a decent offer to write a...
Everybody's watching.
yeah. To write a mainstream course book. If that happens, I'm going to put the next one on hold for a couple of, maybe a year or two.
Okay, the self-publishing project would be on hold.
Yeah, but if it doesn't happen, I'm going to go ahead with the third one. And we're looking at a December 22 release date.
Lewis, thanks very much.
Thank you.